I posthumously promote Police Officer Brian Ward. I posthumously promote Police Officer Brian Ward. I posthumously promote Police Officer Brian Ward.
It's Friday, May 8th, and you're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Grégoire Moll.
And I'm Tyler Daniels. British Conservatives in New York were celebrating last night, confident that their party's strategy had paid off in the country's general elections.
We're going for the jugular tonight. We're looking for non-voters. We're looking for Labour voters. We're going after them.
Staten Islanders are dealing with a heroin epidemic.
Just now, I'm trying to make it aware and make these parents realize you're not alone. It's in every family. It could be my son.
And one senior center is trying to get older New Yorkers more comfortable with technology.
Emil, you crazy? I'm afraid of it. I said nothing to be afraid of.
Also in today's show, public high school funding for sports, planting 1 million trees in the city, and reforming waste collection in New York.
But first, this news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Secretary of State John Kerry met with Gulf Arab officials in Paris today to lay the groundwork for a summit at Camp David next week. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports Kerry says the goal is to agree on new security measures.
Kerry is trying to reassure Arab allies that the U.S. will remain on guard about Iranian behavior in the region, even if the U.S. and other world powers agree to a nuclear deal with Tehran.
President Obama completely understands the stakes. And that's why today and at Camp David, we are fleshing out a series of new commitments.
Kerry says these new security agreements with the Gulf Cooperation Council will go beyond anything the U.S. and its Arab allies have had before. The Camp David summit is set for next Wednesday and Thursday. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
President Obama is touting his Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement outside Portland, Oregon today. Speaking at Nike headquarters, he said the U.S. needs to write the rules of the global economy.
And we should do it today while our economy is in the position of global strength. Because if we don't write the rules for trade around the world, guess what? China will. And they'll write those rules in a way that gives Chinese workers and Chinese businesses the upper hand.
But critics of the proposed trade deal say it would send American jobs overseas. The U.S. Attorney General says the Justice Department will launch a probe into the practices of the Baltimore Police Department. Today's announcement comes as 6 police officers face criminal charges in the death of Freddie Gray, who died last month after he was injured in police custody. International inspectors have found traces of ingredients for sarin and VX nerve agent at a military research site in Syria. That's according to unnamed diplomatic sources quoted by Reuters. NPR's Allison Muse reports the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is working to clarify outstanding issues.
Samples taken from Syria by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons are reportedly testing positive for chemical precursors needed to make toxic agents. The reports come amid fresh allegations by rights groups and doctors that government helicopters dropped chlorine-filled barrel bombs in rebel-held areas. Back in 2013, the U.S. considered strikes against the Assad regime after hundreds of civilians were killed in a sarin gas attack on the rebel-held suburbs of Damascus. The regime denies using chemical weapons at any point in Syria's civil war, but Assad agreed to hand over his stockpile in the wake of the attack. All those declared chemical weapons were destroyed last year. Allison Muse, NPR News, Beirut.
Stocks continue to trade higher on Wall Street. The Dow was up 269 points at 18,193. The Nasdaq Composite up 58 points. The S&P 500 up 28. This is NPR News.
This is
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Hannah Klingberg. The judge in the Ayton Pates case has declared a mistrial after jurors announced for the third time they were deadlocked. 6-year-old Ayton Pates disappeared 36 years ago. Jurors have been deliberating the case against Pedro Hernandez since April 15th. Hernandez made a confession in 2012, but his lawyer says he's too mentally ill to know. Thousands of police officers from around the country lined the streets outside Officer Brian Moore's funeral in Long Island this morning.
I posthumously promote Police Officer Brian Moore, Shield 469, the detective, first grade, in the New York City Police Department.
Police Commissioner Bratton honored Officer Moore during the service. The 25-year-old officer died Monday, 2 days after he was shot in the head in Queens. The suspect is being held without bail. A A posthumous promotion is common practice in New York. It allows additional benefits for Moore's family. Governor Andrew Cuomo is sending state emergency crews to fight a wildfire in Greene County in the Hudson Valley. The governor's office says the fire, which started yesterday, is now 30% contained. Personnel from the State Police, Office of Emergency Management, and other agencies will assist local first responders. Officials from the Roman Catholic Archdiocese from New York announced today that it's beginning the second phase of its consolidation process. As of August 1st, Mass will no longer be celebrated on a regular basis at 6 additional churches. The first phase of the consolidation began in November. When the process is complete, the Archdiocese will have closed 70 churches around the city. The weather this evening will stay sunny with temperatures in the low 70s, and it will continue to be bright and warm throughout Mother's Day on Sunday. Hannah Klingberg, Columbia Radio News.
Yesterday, the United Kingdom's Conservative Party won 51% of the parliamentary seats in the general election, allowing Prime Minister David Cameron to serve another term in office.
Our manifesto is a manifesto for working people, and as a majority government, we will be able to deliver all of it.
Polls projected a much closer race, but the primary opposition Labour Party suffered a major loss of seats. This morning, Labour candidate Ed Miliband resigned as party leader.
I spoke with political commentator David Dimbleby, who hosted the BBC's election coverage last night and, like everyone else, was surprised by the results.
It was a surprise to everybody, I think, including the Conservatives. I mean, the story we were expecting was that this would be what we call a hung parliament. That's to say, with a fairly even balance in the House of Commons, and once again, a government having to make alliances with other parties to govern. When we started the night, the Conservatives, looking at the figures that we had produced from the exit poll, they themselves could barely believe it.
So 5 years of austerity under Cameron's leadership, and these policies have been heavily debated. This should have been an easy sell for Labour. What went wrong?
I suspect what happened is that the Conservative argument that Labour would call austerity, what they would call getting down government debt, won the day. The people felt that was a more secure way of protecting their jobs and their incomes. Clearly, the Labour argument that it was time to soft pedal on austerity, it didn't work. You have to understand the British system, which allows a lot of people to vote against the incumbent government without them getting any representation in Parliament as a result of that. For instance, the party that wants more to the right of the Conservatives, that wants Britain to leave the European Union, they got 12, just over nearly 13% of the vote. They only got one MP in the House of Commons. So there's a huge discrepancy between popular feeling and the people who actually get into the House of Commons.
Let's shift over to Scotland for a minute. What happened in Scotland? Labour have always counted on Scotland for their votes, and they got completely obliterated. They have one seat left.
They've certainly been destroyed as far as this Parliament goes. It's been a long time coming to fruition, this. I mean, the Scottish National Party had been building up strength in the devolved Parliament in Scotland. Labour then sided with the Conservatives on the referendum that was held last year about whether Scotland should or shouldn't remain part of the United Kingdom, which, as you know, was won by the people who wanted to stay in the UK by 55% to 45%. But the SNP then had a head of steam, and there's a feeling that Labour had also, over the years, losing its power base and its influence and its sort of care of Scotland, I think, is the way the Scots might see it. But it's clearly it's a big problem for the Labour Party, that, and quite shocking for them. But it's also a big problem for David Cameron, because the Tory party says it wants to keep the union together and will have to find ways with a very vociferous and a quite aggressive SNP demanding things for Scotland to assuage those needs without breaking up the United Kingdom. And that may involve all kinds of other complications, like increasing the power of England within the United Kingdom, which is one of the ideas that are being mooted, so that England, which is after all by far the largest part of the UK, gets greater control over its own affairs and excludes Scottish voters and Scottish MPs from being part of that.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
David Dimbleby covers British politics for the BBC.
As you heard earlier, the British election was expected to be a nail-biter. But after the exit poll came out in favor of the Conservatives yesterday evening, the uncertainty faded fast.
Ariel Richen spent time at a bar where almost 100 British expats were watching the results roll in.
Upstairs at Slattery's pub in Midtown, the UK election watch party is in full swing. Peter Bellamy sits around a table with a group of fellow Conservatives, or Tories. He's from Wales, originally.
I only came for 3 weeks to New York, and I'm still here 10 years later.
Bellamy runs Big Apple Brits, a group of 2,500 expats in the city. Several dozen gather at Slattery's every other week.
The Brits in New York get together and we, basically drink. So that's, that keeps us going. Keeps us a little bit English, helps us to maintain our accents, keeps our sense of humor going.
That's what it's generally like. Camaraderie abound, he tells me, but not this time. Bellamy is looking to rub it in.
We're going for the jugular tonight. We're looking for non-voters. We're looking for Labour voters. We're going after them.
Ian Williams, chairman of the New York branch of the Labour Party, is an adequate target. He found the exit poll results
pretty disturbing. I was almost considering moving back to Britain. If I did, it would be to sort of take up arms against the new government.
Williams says if it wasn't for the Scottish Nationalist Party, the SNP, his party might have won. That's wishful thinking. The combined SNP and Labour votes came in at just 44%.
Scots nationalists are winning, not because the Scots are necessarily nationalists, but they don't like what London's been doing to them, which is an entirely rational response. And they think that the Labour Party leadership let them down, which it did.
Down the bar, Elisa Gonzalez, an American, said she didn't know much about the UK election at all. She was at the bar with her friends.
And listening to them gas about the SNP for ages and ages, which is apparently a huge shock, but I didn't know what it was until 2 minutes ago.
Gonzalez says she was embarrassed.
I feel shockingly culturally uneducated.
Americans should be more interested in Britain, essentially, and what's happening in British politics. This is a really important day because, we were hoping that the political situation might change significantly.
Helen Barnes, also a Labour supporter, says these elections have real implications for Americans. David Cameron will stay on as Prime Minister. He's promised to hold a referendum on Britain's membership in the EU. Peter Bellamy is fine with that. He's still trying to rub it in after the Tory victory. He approaches Barnes and a group of Labour supporters who moved to New York after the Tories won last time.
They left Britain because of the diabolical government that was in place, and tonight, unfortunately, it's all going downhill as it looks like continuation. Sorry, guys, you're stuck here.
But he's trying to be sympathetic.
The least we can do is get them a bit of beer. But yeah, it's not a good night for those guys.
Can I get a Stella, please? And can you do me some shots?
The Labour supporters are thick-skinned. About a dozen get together to sing the Labour anthem, Red Flag.
The workers' flag is deepest red, it's shrouded after Martyr Day.
The Brits plan to gather again later this month, and they made a promise. Next time, no politics. Ariel Richen, Columbia Radio News.
So raise the scarlet standard high, beneath its shade we'll live or die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag.
Now let's leave the revelry of the bar and head into the greening streets of New York. Back in 2007, Mayor Michael Bloomberg decided he wanted 1 million trees planted over the next decade. The initiative cost the city nearly $400 million, and it's now nearing its goal.
Some of the city's poorest areas were also the ones who had the least trees before the initiative. But that's been changing. Adele Ponte went for a walk around the now leafy street of East New York in Brooklyn to see for herself.
When springtime comes, the streets of New York wake up from a long hibernation and fill up with families, teenagers, strollers, and trees.
Let's see, we are now at 958,728 trees as of this morning. for our goal. So we're getting there. You know, in the fall, we're thinking we're going to plant our millionth tree.
That's Fiorella Trimble, a senior forester for the Parks Department. We're walking on Belmont Avenue. Every 10 yards, there's a tree about 7 feet tall.
This is a sign of new trees right here.
Each one has a tag that says, "I'm 1 in a million." We are at the corner of Milford Street. On the right side, there's a purple leaf plum tree and a cherry tree covered with lovely pink cherry blossoms. Beautiful. But Trimble points out one of the challenges of planting street trees, something only a forester could spot. The trees are
under wires. When we have wires, we usually plant smaller trees.
On the opposite side of the street, there are green ginkgos with small round leaves.
You know, on this side, where there are no lines, we basically plant much larger trees.
In 2007, the city's Parks and Recreation Department started mapping out how they would plant the hundreds of thousands of new trees. The department tried to identify areas that had very few trees and lots of people. Matthew Stevens, the director of street tree planting, says they added another criterion for the neighborhoods.
They also had high rates of childhood asthma, and that's why we called them the trees for public health neighborhoods.
6 neighborhoods were targeted, from the South Bronx to East Harlem to the Rockaways. They tended to be among the poorest in the city. East New York in Brooklyn was one of them.
And that's where we plant both sides of the street, up and down, planting a tree every 30 or 40 feet, and block after block, neighborhood after neighborhood.
That's called block planting, says Fiorella Trimble, pointing to a row of 5 young trees in East New York. In Brooklyn alone, 47,000 trees were planted. The pattern of poor neighborhood and scarce trees is common in cities all across the United States. That's the conclusion of a study directed by Kirsten Schwartz from Northern Kentucky University. She says that trees aren't only pretty, they also have a critical role to play in the city.
From just a tree being a tree and doing its thing. So things like cooling, shading effects, improving water quality, reducing runoff, all of those things are benefits that we can get from trees.
On top of that, the presence of trees helps reduce stress, anxiety, and anger, and that's particularly important in poor neighborhoods. Lindsay Campbell, who works for the New York office of the U.S. Forest Service, says trees make the city more beautiful and more livable, and that's why people need to have access to nearby nature.
The trees can sort of serve as the gateway into the park system, and it's right outside your front door. The pits in which trees are planted is sort of the smallest park in the system.
The New York City program is on track to be completed 2 years ahead of schedule. Lindsay Campbell says the city is already looking to the next step, preserving the trees that were planted.
We need people to be involved in helping to care for this green infrastructure. It's green infrastructure that can live or die. People can actually make a difference.
And Campbell says that in poorer areas, they have the greatest enthusiasm to take care of those trees. Back in East New York, Fiorella Trimble is eager to point out the trees that were well taken care of by the residents of the neighborhood.
Woman who you could tell is a gardener, and her tree pit actually has sort of a makeshift guard to keep the dogs and people out. And she has some other sort of perennials in there. It looks like daffodils, but this is a sign of a tree that's being taken care of for sure.
On May 19th, the city will be launching its decennial tree census in order to keep track of the city's trees, how they grow and how they thrive. The city is recruiting residents to help count the trees. They're called the volunteers. Maybe the month of May is just the right moment to go for a stroll around your neighborhood and take a look at the tree that's just in front of your doorstep. Adelie Ponte, Columbia Radio News.
Mayor Bill de Blasio wants to make the city even greener by improving the air quality of the city and bring landfill waste to zero. That means New York has to reform the way it collects waste.
Right now, more than half of the city's trash is collected by private hauler companies. My co-host Gregoire Moll reports on proposed reforms to that.
Private hauling companies who drive their trucks all around New York City to pick up trash, mostly from businesses. The city takes care of residential waste. The private waste industry is loosely regulated, and that has led to increasing air pollution. The competition between private haulers is tough, so their trucks drive 3 times as far as the city's trucks to pick up the same amount of trash. Samantha McBride teaches urban politics and environmental issues at Baruch College. She says that the private waste collecting system is crippled with inefficiencies.
You have private carters that are collecting in one area, driving 20 minutes, collecting in another area, driving 20 minutes, traversing the city.
Last week, environmental organizations gathered in front of City Hall to ask representatives for more regulation of the private hauling system. These organizations say that one solution to make waste collecting more efficient could be zoning. That's a system also known as franchising. Here's how it works. A bidding competition between private holders would select a handful of them to collect the waste in delimited areas of New York City. Gavin Kearney, of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, says such a system would reduce pollution. Truckers would drive less, and having a reliable pool of customers might encourage them to make greener investments.
When you give somebody a dense customer base, when you tell them you're going to get this for 10 years, you're going to get it for 12 years, they can start to get the financing to invest in new equipment.
Environmentally friendly equipment, that is. But Thomas Toscano, the chief financial officer of a private hauling trucks company, says the system has a cost. Mandatory zones means less competition and higher prices.
If you have a situation where you mandate you must use carter A, he's going to be able to charge you just about anything he wants. And businesses in New York City are going to suffer.
But another issue for companies like Toscano's is that the city is already requiring them to recycle more waste and to have more environmental friendly trucks. That's $1 million investment. And if franchising becomes a reality, Toscano will lose his clients if the city doesn't appoint his company to collect New York's trash.
How can I put my own assets and my own personal, my house and everything else on the line to buy trucks when, again, in one swipe of a pen, they're gone?
That argument doesn't sway urban politics professor Samantha McBride. She points out that some cities like Seattle or Portland have adopted franchising, and it has worked.
This drastically reduces the number of trucks on the road. It drives up the efficiency of collection. It allows the city to monitor
garbage to landfills by 2030, thanks to improvements in recycling, composting, and reusing food waste. At a waste transfer station on Varick Street in Brooklyn, these solutions are starting to take shape. In this station, city trucks dump residential trash into a huge pile that gets bigger as the day goes on. It's now 3:30 p.m.
Peter, how many yards or tons would you say we have on the floor right now?
Right now, this is about 800 tons of garbage, what you're looking at here.
Jay Kaplan and Peter DeLuca are managers of the waste transfer station. Some days, they deal with up to 2,000 tons of waste.
Every day, it's fresh garbage.
After being dumped into the container, the waste is loaded to a railroad car. A big red truck is now removing the empty containers from the train. Attached to the truck, there is a black platform that sticks to the containers, lifts them from the truck, and puts them on the ground.
These machines will place the containers on the rail cars, and they'll remove empties and place them on the truck chassis, which is on the other side, which will then go down and get loaded and start the process all over again.
Because the waste is transported by train, this transfer facility has reduced the air pollution and traffic that would exist if the waste were to be transported by road. That's not the only green initiative of this waste transfer station. Right now, none of the waste processed at this facility is recyclable. But that could change by the end of this year. Kaplan and DeLuca recently got a permit from the city, which will allow them to transform food organics into energy.
We're going to take the food, and it's going to be put into a piece of equipment that will reduce it to a slurry
before being transformed into energy in another plant. The Varick Street station will begin by processing 48 tons of waste a day, and over the next 3 years,
so we're going to ramp up to about 250 tons per day.
That will be 250 tons that won't ever reach a landfill. We are still far from the Myers goal of zero waste, but it is the beginning of a long process. Grégoire Moll, Columbia Radio News. This spring, commentator Paula Lem was a nomad. To avoid a 2-hour commute, she slept in at least a dozen different apartments. Now she's back in an apartment on 29th Street, a place that is kind of a home.
On a warm May night, with summer creeping in through the open windows, this place is almost the way I remember it. The taxi horns waft in from 6th
We're gonna
Avenue,
make it.
and Midtown lurks in a purple-orange haze. It's a vast space in an industrial building. Lois bought this apartment in 2001, when she and my dad were dating. My dad designed the floor-to-ceiling wall of books in the living room, poured the concrete island in the kitchen, and secured what seemed like endless miles of track lighting. I used to live here on weekends. I was 11, and I didn't like Lois very much. For one thing, she got to spend more time with my dad than I did. And for another, she made me do stuff, like hang my towel up to dry instead of dropping it on the bed. Lois saw me go from 11 into those awful, tumultuous teenage years. My face was breaking out, and math tests were a constant anxiety. I just wanted to grow up. I remember looking in the mirror and wondering, when I'm a real person in 10 or 15 years, who am I going to become? Lois, meanwhile, was big city, thoroughly adult. She threw dinner parties, played Moby, and drank Pinot Grigio. I'll always remember Lois's apartment on the night of her 50th birthday. There were forests of lilacs in tall vases, candles illuminating the glass table, and a bathtub full of ice and wine bottles. Pinot Grigio, that is. Guests buzzed and glasses clinked. It was dazzling, and not just because the whole world looked a whole lot bigger back then. In the next few years, though, things changed. My dad and Lois broke up. I went on to college, and Lois moved to Brooklyn. But we stayed in touch. Last May, her tenant moved out, so Lois said I could stay here to spare myself the 2-hour commute from my dad's place in Flushing. The apartment's up for sale, so now it's just me. Looking out across the living room, I feel at home. The concrete countertop, the wall-to-ceiling bookshelves, those miles and miles of lights. But I'm thinking about what lies ahead. I've got a recorder now, and in 2 weeks, I'll have a paper that says I know how to use it. On some days, I feel I'll make it to be a public radio rock star, like the people I look up to. But on other days, like today, I feel just as lame as 14-year-old me. My face breaking out, worried about schoolwork, and still wondering who the hell I'll become. This evening, Lois came by the apartment. She was cleaning out dust from under the table, and I helped her move some boxes. I told her how I felt, and what she said stuck with me.
You want to enjoy the whole process of life. It's not about destinations.
So, instead of getting flustered about my future, I think I'll worry about pestering sources for my next story, even if it does take me a few years to become a rock star.
Paula Lem is trying to enjoy the moment, and drinking Pinot Grigio, of course.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. There's more to come. Stay with us.
We're back with Uptown Radio. I'm Tyler Daniels.
And I'm Grégoire Moll. Uptown Radio is online at uptownradio.org. We are also on air on WBAI-FM. Here's what's coming up in the second half of our show.
Staten Islanders come to term with the borough's new heroin epidemic.
Small public high schools call for more funding for their sports programs.
And researchers want to prove music therapy helps kids on the autism spectrum.
All that and more still to come. But first, the latest news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Nardos Mesmer. The White House is defending an agreement with Iran as the House gets ready to vote on a legislation to finalize the Iran deal. Charlotte Gibson reports.
Secretary of State John Kerry is in Paris today meeting with Middle East allies. He said that the House should follow the Senate's lead and pass the Iran nuclear bill without changes.
We are confident about our ability for the President to negotiate an agreement and to do so with the ability to make the world safer.
But some members in Congress are considering legislation that would block the president from waiving sanctions set by Congress for 30 days. In the president's agreement, Iran would roll back their nuclear program in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said that they are going to make sure that every member of Congress can get a personal briefing from Kerry. Kerry said that it is now up to the negotiators to get down to the nitty-gritty details and hammer out an agreement. Charlotte Gibson, Columbia Radio News.
Ambassador Leif Larsen from Norway and Ambassador Domingo de Lucenario Jr. from the Philippines and 6 others were killed today in a helicopter crash in Analtar Valley of Pakistan. Meanwhile, the ambassador from Poland and the Dutch ambassador walked away with injuries. The ambassadors were headed to an inauguration of a sky chairlift. Saudi Arabia announced a ceasefire today that will halt airstrikes in Yemen. The ceasefire will start on Tuesday, May 12th. Saudi Arabia officials said airstrikes have done little to stop the rebel group, the Houthis. The minister, Adel Al-Jubeir, said the ceasefire is a trial and success will depend on Houthis' cooperation. The Saudi-led coalition bombing began in Yemen 2 months ago on a Trans-Pacific partnership.
If you're a country that wants into this agreement, you have to meet higher standards. If you don't, you're out. And this deal would strengthen our hand overseas by giving us the tools to open other markets to our goods and services and make sure they play by the fair rules we help write. The truth is we have one of the most open markets in the world. Folks are already selling stuff here. We got to be able to sell there.
After deliberating for more than 3 weeks, a judge has declared a mistrial after a jury could not agree if 54-year-old Pedro Hernandez killed Ethan Patz. A zoo in Japan today has apologized for naming a baby monkey Charlotte after the new British princess following complaints from the Japanese public. I'm Nardos Mesmer, and this is Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. This is Grégoire Moll.
And I'm Tyler Daniels. For more than 10 years, the NSA has collected data on Americans' phone calls. Yesterday, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the USA Patriot Act doesn't authorize that.
NSA's current phone data collection program is scheduled to come to an end on June 1st, and Congress will soon vote on whether or not to renew it. Margot Schlanger is a former officer for civil rights and civil liberties at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. She says NSA surveillance has helped prevent terrorist attacks.
There's no question that NSA surveillance in other ways has helped with counterterrorism. But as far as evidence of this particular program, I don't think there is very much.
This decision doesn't say if it's constitutional or not. How long will it take before we have a definitive answer on the constitutional issue and on the program?
The Second Circuit said it was not deciding the constitutional issue, and that is a very normal way for a court to behave. If the Congress does decide to renew the program in some way so that bulk telephone metadata continues to be collected, then the constitutional issue will become ripe. And so we would expect to see a result. It could be a year or two.
President Obama said yesterday he was in favor of changing this program and of stopping the collection of metadata. I'm wondering, is anybody capable of overseeing efficiently the NSA?
Your question implies that the NSA has somehow gone rogue, and I don't think that's a fair accusation. The NSA undertook this program. They asked the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, if it would be okay. The FISA court said it would be okay, and several committees of Congress also said, yeah, that's okay. Now, it's true that the public didn't know about it, and that once the public found out about it, all of a sudden the calculus changed considerably. And the public has been unhappy about it, and Congress as a whole has not been thrilled at the program. And so I don't mean that the program should go forward, but I don't think it's true that the NSA has just been off doing its own thing as some kind of rogue agent.
No, and you point out something really important, which is like this secret court, the FISC. I'm wondering, like, what's the rationale behind using this court?
When the FISA court began, it really heard much more individual matters. Should we have a warrant about this person? Those decisions were made, in closed court, because if you reveal them, then, it destroys the investigation. But the FISA court has been given more and more programmatic supervision, where it's asked to approve not just individual warrants, but whole programs of surveillance. And the argument that that should take place in secret, I think, is much, much weaker. But the FISA court secrecy has held. Now, recently, the FISA court has become a little bit more public, and it actually has a website, and it publishes some of its opinions and so on. But that's as a result of the Snowden disclosures, not as a result of anything else.
What would you like to see in its place?
At a very minimum, a really robust public advocate who could appear in front of the FISA court and represent the considerations that have to do with privacy and civil liberties and the citizens. And I would like for the FISA court to declassify as much of its programmatic decision-making as is possible.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Margot Schlenger is a professor at the University of Michigan Law School.
Staten Island is in the middle of a heroin epidemic. The borough has the most opiate deaths per capita in the city, twice Manhattan's rate.
Most of these fatalities are happening on the island's more prosperous South Shore. Joe Sykes reports on how Staten Islanders are searching for ways to come to terms with the problem.
It's on the Staten Island ferry you first notice all might not be well in New York's least populated borough. Among advertisements for Italian restaurants and golf resorts, there are public service posters which portray empty beer bottles and boxes of pills. The tagline, "Heroin starts here." Claire Porcello says that's how her son Joey got addicted.
This is his graduation picture. That's when he started. That's when he first took that pill. That's when he wasn't himself anymore.
He started using. First pills, usually the painkiller OxyContin, then onto heroin. His mother says the drugs changed him.
Just made him a totally different person. He never smiled. It just changed him. His whole personality wasn't nice anymore. He was angry at everyone.
Joey died in the summer of 2013 of a heroin overdose. And every couple of weeks, there's another obituary like Joey's in the pages of the Staten Island Advance. The Porcellos are from the South Shore. It's the land of pizza parlors and nail salons, Republican politics and auto repair shops. But now it's also heroin's new home. In 2014, the Porcellos neighborhood had the second highest rate of overdose deaths in the whole of the New York City area. Heroin took off on the South Shore a year and a half ago, after New York State made it tougher for addicts to get prescription drugs by shopping for a new doctor. Rob Stroh is one of those addicts and was Joey's best friend. He says between the new laws and the falling street price of heroin, it just doesn't make sense anymore to go looking for pills.
I'm going to say in the past 2 years, it just got ridiculous. One $10 bag of heroin is stronger than a $25 pill. So what are kids going to want to do?
When Joey died, Stroh decided to try and come off drugs.
Your skin's crawling, cold sweats, you're hot, you're cold. You're clammy, your bones are aching, you can't go to the bathroom right, you're all backed up. And I had to go through that during Joey's wake, the funeral, all that.
He lasted about 7 months before relapsing. He says it's such a tight-knit community here, it's hard to stay clean.
When that's all you know, and those are all the people you're comfortable with, and those are all the people that you love, and they got love for you, and it's hard because it's everywhere. And they're everywhere.
The same dynamic on the South Shore that makes it hard for addicts to kick the drugs makes it hard for parents to talk about them. And that's where Alicia Palermo Reddy comes in.
Parents were afraid to let the neighbors, or if the mother goes to a gym, she didn't want anybody knowing their child was a drug addict. just now I'm trying to make it aware and make these parents realize you're not alone. It's in every family. It could be my son.
Like most families here, she's had first-hand experience. She has 2 nephews who've suffered from addiction. So she started informal meetings in the yard of her house a couple of years ago. They were small, 10, maybe 20 mothers. Then people started to talk.
This is Our Lady Star of the Sea Church. This is the school here. That's the auditorium where we hold the meetings.
Her yard was no longer big enough, so she moved the location to the school. Now they meet monthly. She even runs a twice-yearly forum that attracts over 500 people from all over the island.
I keep my phone on. It's like a 24-hour hotline, and my phone rings all day. All day. Let me see who this is. Hold on. Oh, I hung up on her. That was actually a mother calling about her 16-year-old son that uses and doesn't know what to do with him.
Paloma Reddy calls herself Addiction Angel. She thinks telling stories and getting people to relate to each other will stop kids from dying. But it won't help those who are addicted now if they overdose. That requires a different solution.
These are them. Overdose Prevention Rescue Kit. English and Spanish.
What Paloma Reddy's showing me is the main line of defence in Staten Island's attempt to tackle the addiction crisis. Its essential element is a drug called Narcan.
Basically what Narcan does is it's a blocker.
Adrian Buccaleri is director of the opioid prevention program on Staten Island. When you take an opiate, it attaches to receptors in your brain that tell your body to slow down. Often, if the drug is too strong, this can lead to your body shutting off. That's an overdose.
The Narcan comes and attaches to that opioid receptor on the brain and blocks it and takes away the opiate.
According to the NYPD, Narcan saved about 25 lives last year on Staten Island. Staten Island was the first place to trial Narcan, and now it's being rolled out across New York State. And anyone can administer it. Buccaleri says since the program started a few years back, she's trained thousands and thousands of people. And that's easy, because all it is a nasal spray. The problem for Staten Island, though, is Narcan might save people's lives, but that's all it does. So thoughts are turning towards the next generation.
We have to start working on the ones now, the young ones, the 9-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, so that when they get to high school, they know I ain't going near that.
So the NYPD and the Staten Island Borough President are launching a couple of initiatives this spring, which aim to teach elementary school kids about the dangers of drugs and addiction. But that's too late for Claire Porcello.
I wish I could just wipe it all out of here, and I want to sell my house because of this. I don't even want to live on Staten Island anymore. It's so bad. Now today, my daughter is pregnant now, and she's going to have to grow up her child here. I'm scared. I really am.
Though she's leaving, her family's staying. And the heroin problem on Staten Island isn't going anywhere soon. Joe Sykes, Columbia Radio News.
Over the last 12 years, over 100 small public schools have replaced large ones in New York City. But these smaller schools have struggled to... A report from the city's controller's office earlier this week found that resources to get kids physically active are unevenly distributed in the city. Critics say that this gap disproportionately affects Black and Latino students.
Now, some of the students at small schools are fighting for a bigger share of the funding for their sports. Charlotte Gibson reports.
It's Wednesday night, around 10 p.m., and the Eagles, a team of high school students from the Lower East Side, are playing soccer against the Tri-Boroughs, a group of men in their 20s and 30s.
Pass. Wide, let's go wide.
It's the Gotham City Amateur Men's League, and tonight's match is special. It's the last league match of the season. The 11 players on the field all work together, moving the ball around from player to player. Coach El Hadji Diopi yells in Wolof from the sidelines. Many of his players are from his native country, Senegal.
That's a good ball, hey!
Alex Salos plays for the Tri-Boroughs. He says this is the first time his team has played the Eagles.
I think it's great. I mean, can get a little physical and, they're still young, they're still, developing, and they have a lot more ahead of them.
The team wins 3-0, finishing off their season. 4 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. Coach Diopie says win or lose, the boys are just happy for the opportunity to play.
They get hyped, very hyped. They love this game. They have fun, These are good kids, good students. It's tough to be a student athlete, but they enjoy it,
Many of these players have been playing soccer since they could walk. For them, soccer is life. The problem is that there are no sports teams available for these students at their high school. Each year, the city's Department of Education distributes $24 million to Public School Athletic League, or PSAL, and that funds sports at more than 400 public schools. But smaller schools, including Manhattan Comprehensive High School, where our soccer players attend, is too small to get money. The principal and athletic director from their school scraped together almost $5,000 to let their students play soccer in an outside amateur league. Mark Dorman is the athletic director at the high school.
By the DOE and the PSAL refusing to let these kids play, and not just my kids, but the hundreds and thousands, they are denying the potential of all the kids.
Out of the 480 public high schools in the city, nearly 70 have no sports teams at all.
Civil rights matter. Let them play. Let them play.
A small group of students and administrators from some of these schools have been protesting every Wednesday evening in front of City Hall. Hasunatu Samaki is a senior at International High School. She is one of the students who organized the NYC Let 'em Play protests.
If we had sport, we will be playing in soccer field, baseball field, or basketball field. But because we don't have sports, all we have left is to go every Wednesday at City Hall to protest so they can hear us, so they can do something. So next spring we will be able to play.
Sports is a vital part of an education.
David Garcia Rosen is the former dean of International High School in the Bronx, one of the schools that lost its funding when it was downsized. He says there are so many students of color affected. It's a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Right now, next year, the schools with the white students are going to get a disproportionate amount of funding and access, and Black and Latino students are going to get less access and less funding.
4 years ago, Garcia Rosen tried to solve the problem by starting the Small School Athletic League. That grassroots campaign was money pulled together with individual school budgets. Last May, the DOE gave more than $800,000 to the small league on the condition that it would become part of the larger PSAL. But with the PSAL now in charge of the budget, Garcia Rosen says that nothing has changed.
On the DOE level, I think there is still denial. We tried very hard at discussion and negotiation. The DOE is paralyzed by institutional racism that they cannot shake.
The DOE did not respond to repeated requests. In previous statements, they said they're working on it. Garcia Rosen says not fast enough. Last November, he filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education. In March, Garcia Rosen was suspended for protests outside of City Hall with students. Councilmember Andy King is the co-chair of the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus. He says he's ready to do more.
I want us to take the politics out of it and do what's right for these students and the children that want to play high school sport.
Fatu Boy agrees. She's a 17-year-old junior from International High School. She says this lack of funding is nothing short of segregation.
Not having a sports make me really feel frustrated. Like, what do we have to do as a student to get sports? Besides being white or besides going to big school, what else can we do to get sports?
The students say they will continue to fight until Mayor de Blasio and Chancellor Carmen Farina meet their demands. Charlotte Gibson, Columbia Radio News.
There might be fewer sports programs, but there is still recess.
Nonprofits are stepping in to make sure that kids are still getting active during the school day, despite space limitations. Teresa Alvila reports.
The way Shakia Kopenig remembers it, recess in school used to be simpler.
When we were kids, recess was just, they gave us a bunch of balls and a bunch of jump ropes and they just go play.
Kopenig is a play coach with Asphalt Green. It's a nonprofit group that partners with city schools to ensure kids have access to fun, physical activities during recess in school. But a lot of them don't. Physical education classes aren't readily available, and opportunities for playtime during recess are rare. Add to that, they don't get the proper nutrition at home, Koenig says.
Our kids they're getting fat. It's just as real as it gets.
Recess has long served as an opening during the busy school day to get kids active. But schools have limitations that make that harder to achieve, according to David Ludwig of Asphalt Green.
When you take these types of space and budget constraints into consideration, the schools need help.
More than a quarter of the city's schools are in violation of a state mandate that they provide physical education resources, according to a new report by the Office of the City's Controller. Blame it on lack of space, lack of funding, lack of sufficient supervision, the usual. Resources might be slim, but schools have a window of opportunity.
And what they do have every day is recess.
Having 20 to 25 minutes a day that kids can look forward to for having physical activity has lifelong implications, Ludwig says.
If you're not having fun as a kid moving around, what are the chances that you're gonna get involved in a sport and be active later in life?
And on a Friday afternoon, more than 200 students gathered at Asphalt Green in East Harlem to play games like Gaga Ball. 10-year-old Sabin Bays explains the game to me.
Okay, there's a ball, and then you have to try not to let it hit your foot. So you have to hit the ball with 4 fingers. If it hits your foot, you're out.
Shakia Koenig says it takes an awful lot out of her to work with kids on games like Gaga Ball. She says kids are naturally chock full of energy.
These kids are on 1,000 like every minute. So you just have to be kind of ready for that energy because it's going to come at you full force.
Asphalt Green currently works with 61 schools in the city, but hopes to increase that number next year. Teresa Avila, Columbia Radio News.
Some therapists have been using music for years to help kids on the autism spectrum overcome issues of hyperactivity or speech. But evidence that it's clinically effective is mostly anecdotal. And insurers don't pay for therapies that have only anecdotal support.
Now, researchers are wrapping up a study that might just provide the rigorous scientific proof that music therapy is effective. Camille Von Cannell reports.
When Marcia Wiener's son was 8, he didn't always keep his hands to himself, which is something kids on the autism spectrum sometimes have trouble with. So his mom started taking him to music therapy with Jennifer Goodman. She calls herself Jammin' Jen. She wrote a song for him and posted it on YouTube.
And if you want to give somebody a kiss, can I kiss please? Mwah. You always have to ask, because you keep your hands to yourself. You keep your hands to yourself.
Wiener says her son's therapy worked.
We could go back and cite that song if there was a situation where he might reach out and touch somebody, and he would immediately be able to say, oh, okay, I'm going to stop.
Now her son is 12. He sings in his middle school's choir, but he has a hard time focusing. So that's what Jammin' Jen is working on now.
You know, when he's on with her, he is so focused.
But her son is just one example. The problem is insurance companies want more than examples before they pay. Right now, the majority still don't pay for music therapy. Anecdotes like this just don't cut it in the world of medicine, says Michael Tott. He leads the Center for Biomedical Research in Music at Colorado State University.
If somebody says the most successful intervention is this and this, but I can't prove it because I can't measure it, I wouldn't even go to a dentist who tells me that.
There's a scientific framework in place to measure things like clinical treatments. The testing needs to be standardized, and other researchers need to be able to replicate it.
That's just a healthcare standard.
Tott wants to rewire the brains of kids on the spectrum who have erratic movements or speech problems. He uses MRIs, or brain scans, to track changes. But MRIs can't see everything. Ken Egan teaches music therapy at NYU. He says reducing music therapy to just raw data doesn't do it justice.
It's a disservice to try to bend that treatment into an overly strict scientific and medical framework.
Egan focuses on holistic changes, like improving the social skills of kids with developmental disabilities. He says that makes it even harder to standardize.
Because we don't know what music will work.
Researchers is trying to prove that individualized music therapy really works. They're funded by the Norwegian government, and they're wrapping up research in the next year. It's the biggest study of a therapy for autism that isn't a pharmaceutical. Researchers in 12 countries have seen around 300 patients over the last 5 years or so. 50 of them came through the U.S. site, a facility on Long Island.
When they hear about us, they come here, they fill out all the paperwork to be involved.
John Carpente is leading the research at Molloy College. He says patients get screened, then get randomly broken up into 3 groups. 2 groups will come in for music therapy, either once a week or 3 times a week. 1 group will have no therapy. This is a randomized control study, which Carpente calls
the gold standard in research.
And this is what a session might sound like. Laura Gennaro, the clinical coordinator at the Center for Autism here, plays the role of a patient at the drums and cymbals, while Carpente is at the piano.
And whatever she does, I want to compose music around that to make that into the greatest thing possible.
Each session is slightly different depending on what the patient wants to do. Carpente might start singing. They might giggle together.
So just in this little interaction, think about all of the skills that Laura needs to have in place.
She needs to stay focused. She needs to catch visual cues like a smile or musical cues like a certain note. She needs to follow patterns. These are all things kids with autism might struggle with, and that music might be able to teach. NYU's Ken Egan was talking about this improvisational technique before. Carpente was his student. In this study, patients get music therapy for 5 months, but stay involved for a full year. Gennaro tests the kids at different time points to measure the severity of their autism and whether it changes.
So we've either seen that the scores go down, which means that they're less severe, or we've seen maybe a fairly consistent one across the board.
The researchers still need to compile all their data and submit it for peer review. But Carpente hopes the study's scientific design will click with the medical community.
I don't know if that's the way to go, but we are just kind of joining in, and hopefully that we can get in there with their language.
For future research, Carpente says he's hoping to include some sort of brain imaging, just to have some more evidence. Camille Von Cannell, Columbia Radio News.
Age creates a digital divide. Seniors aren't as connected online. 40% of them don't go online at all, according to a Pew Research report. And many seniors don't have access to broadband at home.
Hava Gurari went to a senior center in Queens that's bucking the trend and connecting seniors online.
It's Wednesday morning at the Benjamin Rosenthal Senior Center in Flushing. Groups of women are playing mahjong, and in the gym, a yoga class is getting started. Off to the side, in a small room, Dee Walker is starting her 10 a.m. sing-along class.
As I mentioned, we had 3 issues to cover today. The Cinco de Mayo, birthdays for May, and then we lost our Benny King. So I'm going to be doing a few of his songs, which I know everybody remembers this.
There are a few people in the room with Dee, but another 10 or so participants appear on the bottom of the flat screen TV on the wall.
There is a rolling Spanish harbor.
There's more going on here than just off-key singing. The students on the screen are connecting from their homes. Dee's class is part of the Virtual Senior Center, which is run by a nonprofit called Self-Help. The Virtual Senior Center has about 200 clients, mostly women, all in New York City, who regularly take classes from their homes. It's one of the only programs of its kind, but it's part of a growing number of organizations trying to get seniors online. Dee has a balloon in her hair. She's keeping an eye on all the seniors on her screen, and she's getting them to move a little bit.
Okay, open and close those hands.
One of the participants in today's class is 92-year-old Rose Binder. She lives just a 7-minute bus ride away, so before the class ends, I head to her one-family home to meet her.
Hi. Did you see me on the program?
Yeah. Are you still on?
Yeah, this is still on, but...
Dee's class is just ending. Rose has her headset on and is sitting in front of her laptop at the dining room table. The Virtual Senior Center, which gets its money from grants and private donations, would have given her a computer if she didn't already have one. Rose takes me to the Senior Center's homepage and clicks on the day's calendar.
Today, let's go back to home. Tai Chi, energy exercise. I don't like that. I do enough exercise in Dee's class. This one I'd like to go to. It's at 12 o'clock. No, I think I'll skip that and go to the 4 o'clock one because I have to eat lunch too.
These classes are anchors for Rose's day. Rose is in good shape for a 90-something, but she's largely housebound after a fall a few years back. Carmela Chesson is the coordinator at the Virtual Senior Center. She says they ask their clients to attend at least 4 classes a week.
We want the program to help them with isolation, loneliness, etc. So if they're not social, it's really not doing anything for them.
It's a support system and a community for people who might otherwise be completely isolated. Social isolation can lead to depression, and that contributes to a whole list of healthcare problems.
The better you feel mentally and emotionally, the better your health is going to be, your actual physical health.
Which means they can spend less time at the doctor and more time living. And these days, a lot of living is happening online. Lori Orlov is the founder of Aging in Place Tech. It's an industry news site dedicated to the technology market for older adults.
There is now a worsening digital divide, not between necessarily the rich and the poor, but between the connected and those who are not connected.
Orlov says one of the problems when you talk about seniors is that everyone from 65 to 100 gets painted with the same brush. Many people in their 60s have been using computers for much of their careers. It's people in their 70s and older that are getting shut out. And online access is quickly becoming a necessity.
Many of the traditional mechanisms for older adults to get information have switched from being paper and physical to being online.
For example, Social Security is closing down offices and moving to direct deposit. Bank branches are shutting, and even disappearing bookstores put people without an Amazon account at a disadvantage. Most technologies created for seniors are healthcare related. That includes home monitoring, medication trackers, devices that track movement, and telehealth services. The exclusive focus on healthcare can detract from the most important thing for anyone of any age, human interaction. For Rose, the internet is her social lifeline. One of the classes she logs into regularly is taught by Alicia Ferguson on Saturdays.
I teach a class that's called Washington This Week. It's about national politics, where I'll propose a topic and then I'll ask questions like, what do you guys think?
Last Saturday, the discussion was about the 2016 presidential candidates. Hillary Clinton came up a lot.
I'm not prepared to say I don't like Hillary, but I'm worried about her.
Ferguson says the same 8 to 10 people come to her class every week.
None of them have ever met each other, but yeah, it's like they care so deeply about each other. We've kind of become this like little family.
Getting more seniors online will mean access to affordable broadband, more training and support from community and caregivers, and devices that are better designed for older users. There's one more barrier that stops older adults from going online, and that's fear. Rose isn't just lucky or savvy, she's fearless. Here's her advice.
There's one lady, she had a question to Carmela, so I said, why don't you email her? So she says, email, you crazy? I'm afraid of it. I said, nothing to be afraid of. She says, I'll break the computer. I said, if you make a mistake, nothing's going to happen.
Even at 92, Rose Binder's world extends far beyond her dining room table, and that's thanks to this new modern invention, the internet. Chava Garari, Columbia Radio News.
There's an old saying, write when you get work. Commentator John Dingus did get a job, so he decided to write home to his father.
Hi, Dad. We haven't been in touch for a while. I want to bring you up to date on what's been happening since we last talked. I know you were proud that I was studying for the priesthood. I gave that a good try, but it wasn't right. Now, actually, for quite a while now, I have not just a job, but a profession. I fell into it kind of by accident. I wrote a letter to a newspaper, and they said, "You seem literate. Come in for a tryout." They made me a copy editor, then a police reporter. Then I was a freelancer in Latin America. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I don't mean it was easy. Journalism puts you face to face with reality, often grim reality. At one point, I was in Central America covering a civil war, Guatemala. Soldiers had been raiding villages all around Crater Lake, hundreds of feet deep. It is said the Mayas, before they were conquered by the Spaniards, would row out in boats and throw gold figurines over the side, returning their riches to the gods. We were staying in a hotel on the edge of the lake. 2 reporter friends and I swam out, far from shore, early in the morning. The mist was still rising from the water. In that moment, the killing in the hills around us could not touch us. We did not have to think about the massacre a priest had described to us the day before. For me, it was a centering moment in a place of transcendence where this world, the world below, and the heavens were connected, run through as by a spear, top to bottom. We swam back, we wrote our stories, we tried to get to the truth. I know journalists don't use this kind of language to talk about what we do, but I also know, Dad, I am where I should be, doing what I was meant to do, struggling to understand both the glory and the evil of it all. Maybe we don't talk like we used to, Dad, but I want you to know I took your advice. You said, get a good education like your mother's. Your grandfather was a farmer. I'm a car dealer in a small town. You move up to the next step. Whatever you do, don't go into the car business. Well, I have come a long way from Emmitsburg, Iowa. Recently, I've been teaching young journalists how to use sound to craft stories on the radio. I spend as much time in Latin America as I can. I'll tell you about Carolina and the kids in my next letter. One thing for sure, being an accidental journalist, I can't remember having a single boring day. I do still think about God, and I never sold a car.
John Dingus is retiring from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism after 19 years. It just so happens that's how old he was when his father died.
That does it for this edition and year of Uptown Radio. Thanks for listening.
Anjali Sastre choreographed the radio ballet as executive producer. Cassandra Bassler got all the dancers on point.
Ariana Skybell led the studio orchestra with Joe Sykes and Hava Garari.
Alistair Gardiner and Camille Van Canel scripted the scenes.
Dasha Litzitsina and Paula Lem put the show online.
Our expert stagehands were Miriam Sitz and Adelie Ponte.
Thanks to our professors Carrie Donahue, Rick Carr, and Danielle Arlacone for their help this year.
Shout out to Shep Birkin for his technical assistance.
And we want to give a special thanks to our professor, John Dingus, who's retiring after 19 years of teaching.
This one's for John.
We'll miss you, John.
I'm Tyler Daniels.
And I'm Gregoire Moll. Uptown Radio's final broadcast for this year will be on WBAI Monday at 5 a.m. You can download our podcast and find all of our shows from this year online at uptownradio.org. You can also contact us on Twitter at Uptown Radio and on Facebook. Thanks for listening.
I'm ready.
I'm ready as well.
We just have to do that, right? We don't even have any re-records. Do we? Why?
Oh, what?
Oh.
Oh, yeah. I'll find it.
Yep. Is there... Do you have the thing? No, we don't
No,
need
no,
music.
no.
We don't need music.
No.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Which one? Do you want to be host 1 or 2?
No, whatever.
Okay, be host 1.
Okay. Uptown Radio is a production of Columbia Radio News, online at uptownradio.org.
This is listener-supported, commercial-free WBAI Pacifica Radio at 99.5 FM and online at wbai.org. Let me just say, the following episode of Uptown Radio was recorded on Friday, May 8th. Uptown Radio is a production of Columbia Radio News. Wait, let me just see the return.
Okay. And then let's just the host intro. Let's find it.
Oh, yeah.
Is it... Dun, 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 dun.
I'm getting good at this WBAI thing.
Is it the Gibson's intro? I think it is for the sports one, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yep. Over the last 12 years, over 100 small public schools have replaced large ones in New York City. But these smaller schools have struggled to form their own sports programs. A report from the city's controller's office earlier this week found that resources to get kids physically active are unevenly distributed in the city. Critics say that this gap disproportionately affects Black and Latino students.
Now, some of the students at small schools are fighting for a bigger share of the funding for their sports. Charlotte Gibson reports.